And greetings and welcome to the QCast. This is season 3, episode 32. And we're going to take a brief pause here from all the commotion and chaos and great stuff happening in the Division 3 men's and women's tournaments, heading to the Final Fours, obviously, this coming week. And we're going to talk about a really important cause with a former Illinois Wesleyan basketball player and Illinois Wesleyan alum who is doing some wonderful things to help kids. And I have with me Andrew Gilmore. Andrew was the Illinois Wesleyan class of 2009. Andrew, Lincoln High School, the Rail Splitters, and then you moved to Stillwater, Minnesota. So when you were an Illinois Wesleyan recruit, you were technically a Minnesota kid, but kind of a rail splitter at heart, right? I mean, some pretty good basketball roots there.
100%. Always a rail splitter. I mean, I tell people all the time, I knew the 1-2-2 full court ball press by the time I was like 8 years old. That right. Never leaves you.
Andrew, currently you live in Arlington Heights with your family, your wife, Lauren, your kids. And we're going to talk about all that and kind of how we got to be here today. I did also want to mention your day job. You're the Associate General Counsel for the Chicago Bulls. After you graduated from Illinois Wesleyan, and you can fill me in on this, but I believe you went to University of Illinois Law School and then also went to Northwestern Law. Give me that academic piece, post Illinois Wesleyan, for people that lost track of Andrew Gilmore. Talk about your post IW schoolwork.
For sure. So before I went to law school, so I graduated Illinois Wesleyan in 2009, and then I went straight into the Teach for America program. So I taught middle school English in inner city St. Louis for 2 years in the St. Louis public school system. Then after that, I went to University of Illinois for law school for 1 year. And then after a year, I transferred up to Northwestern in Chicago. And so I graduated law school at Northwestern. At the time I was dating, all through Teach for America. And then my first year of law school, I was dating my now wife, Lauren, who was living and working in Chicago. So being able to go to law school in Chicago was a lot easier. Plus, Northwestern was a school I wanted to go to begin with. And so that's where I graduated. After that, I went and worked at Catton, Much and Rosenman in Chicago. Catton's it's got a huge corporate sports practice. That was one of the draws. It was also the managing partner of Catton was Kevin Bryant's uncle, KB is one of the guys I played with, one of my best friends who tragically passed away right before my senior year of college. His uncle was managing partner when I first started. And that was kind of my first foray into sports law, but primarily did corporate sports.
So the Associate General Counsel for the Bulls, I remember seeing that LinkedIn update come across. I was like, how does this kid from Lincoln get to be the Associate General Counsel for the Bulls? What exactly does an Associate General Counsel do, Andrew?
Yeah, so it's first of all, it's an extremely fun job. It kind of was the perfect opportunity at the perfect time. I was in private practice for about 8 years, doing, again, like I said, some corporate sports work, but primarily corporate mergers and acquisitions. And it just so happened, then we'll get into it in a little bit, but when my kids were sick, I had to take a little bit of a step back in my private practice. And I was just getting to the point where I was kind of like thinking to myself, okay, what's the next 10, 20 years look like? And it was at that moment that the Bulls Associate General Counsel position opened up. But so I've only been doing it for about 4 months is when I accepted the job, and I've been on the job about 4 months. First of all, it's a blast. I mean, it's at the United Center. So like every day you're walking into a basketball environment, that part's fun. And we kind of, our department, it's just me as Associate General Counsel and then our General Counsel. So there's only 2 lawyers in the whole place. And we kind of touch on everything from, any sort of sponsorship or naming rights or just general commercial agreement we're touching, any sort of day-to-day operations or any sort of legal day-to-day stuff that comes up, whether it's something that happens, with a fan in the building, or if it's a, player issues or coaching issues, we're in some sort of internal investigation we need to run, we'll handle that. Then there's, I would call it, NBA league-wide governance type stuff. So the NBA itself has its own overarching set of rules, almost like a constitution and bylaws. And so being one of the chief legal people within the Bulls, we're the ones liaising with the NBA to make sure our business folks and our basketball folks are all operating as we should. And then our business folks and basketball operations folks are coming to us all the time, making sure they know kind of what the guardrails are. And then there's,
Really cool.
ownership, investor type stuff as well. So it's some nuts and bolts corporate stuff, some nuts and bolts commercial type arrangement stuff, some just kind of day to day need someone to help make decisions, and then fair amount of basketball related day to day stuff as well, which is pretty fun.
It's really cool, and congrats on all of your success. One thing I wanted to ask you, a lot of my focus in this podcast and in other places is on kind of that like YD3 hashtag, that like the value of being a Division III student athlete and how that can help you in life. Certainly having played for the Titans and competed in the CCIW, competed in Division III, there's things that you've taken from that after college to this day. I'm just curious what some of the top things are that you benefited from that experience.
100%. I loved every freaking second of my 4 years at Illinois Wesleyan. And then when you combine the fact that, you had to be, you're a student first, but then you also had to learn, just like the basic, managing your schedule and your time, making sure that you were committed to your teammates, but then also doing your schooling and then also finding some time to have some fun while you're at it. I mean, that was just something that I don't think many kids in college get. But then for me, it was mostly it was the locker room stuff, just like the relationships that I developed in my 4 years at Wesleyan. And, like for me, my actual playing career didn't pan out the way I wanted it to because of with my knees. I didn't even play my last 2 years, but I got every ounce out of my experience with Wesleyan and just learning what it meant to be a part of a true team and a true program, and like understanding that there were things that were more important than just you, but at the same time, you were a very important piece of that program. Just like learning both the individual aspects, but then also more of the collective team aspects. Just in order to be successful, in any organization, you have to learn how to do those things. And so, I tell people all the time, probably until my kids' health issues hit, I learned everything I learned in life from playing team sports. And, Wesleyan was kind of the culmination of that.
Yeah, it's your knees were. I remember those years, and you were injured, and you got on the floor. I think it was your sophomore year. You played a bunch, and then you never were able to get healthy. I want to ask you about that time period too that you played for the Titans. Kind of an interesting time because you were there for a coaching transition, which I think is always really difficult. So when you came there your freshman year, Scott Trost was the coach. And holy crap, did Coach Trost have the cupboard loaded. So you got to play with Douchis, Emilianovich, Freeman, the Joneses, Schweer, Fisher, Matt Arnold. I'm not naming someone and they're going to be mad at me, but Mike McGraw, these names are just going to keep popping in my head.
Yep.
You go from that group, and then Coach Trost takes the Lewis job, and the Titans hire Ron Rose. I'm just curious, before we get into the real stuff here in this podcast, what was it like to be a student athlete going through that kind of coaching transition?
Well, it was interesting because I remember, your whole life is changing anyways. Because I was a freshman in college. My freshman year was like about as fun of a freshman year as you can possibly imagine. Because I think I was the lone freshman that was playing with the varsity guys, and I basically got a front row seat to watching a bunch of guys who probably had no business playing Division III basketball, just how talented they were. When you talk about Douchis and the Freemans and the Jones twins and, Keelan and Jay Fish and all these guys, they were just so good. And they played, and they were such a good group of guys, and then they were such a great group of teammates that I just got to be a part of that. And it was an absolute blast. And then, we went to the Final Four, also a blast. And then then Coach Trost takes the job at Lewis, and we all started to get kind of wind that was happening. Then it did happen. And then it was like, we were all just kind of wondering in our minds, Wesleyan was still going to be Wesleyan. And then it was like, all right, well, who's it going to be? And then Coach Rose comes in, and, he's a Wesleyan grad. He'd been at Bloomington. I think he was at Bloomington High School before he came to Wesleyan. And so we thought, okay, we've got a Wesleyan guy. And then it was just like, all right, well, our whole team just left because we just wanted to find a four. Well, we had the Freemans back and Darius back. So we felt like we still should be really good. And it just felt like kind of an opportunity to, okay, let's get to know the new guy who's not really the new guy because he was a known quantity, and let's figure out how we can best win. And so I think that was kind of all of our mindset. And it was funny going into it because Coach Trost and Coach Rose have such two very different approaches to,
That's
to
fair.
how they coach.
We could
So,
have a whole Q cast on Coach
yeah,
Trost versus Coach Rose. Both people, by the way, who I love. Both guys who I
agreed.
think
Yeah.
are awesome people. But
Hmm.
we could have a Q cast. We could get a whole bunch of guys with you on this, and we could talk about that, Andrew. That
That,
would probably
yeah,
be a pretty good
that'd be a
show,
fun
right?
one. Yeah. Well, it goes back to the last lesson you asked about lessons you take away from Wesleyan. Is there's one of the things you learn is, there are many different ways to be successful. And, they each have been successful in their own right, and they do it in very, very, very different ways. And that's, I've learned that in life and in professional life as well.
Yeah. So you went through that coaching transition, and of course, Ron has gone on to do great things with the Titans. Coach Trost has gone on to do great things at Lewis. So let's get into the meat of this, Andrew. You have formed a foundation called, co-founded it with your wife, called
Mm-hmm.
the Gilmore Family Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And at its heart, it's formed to help kids with rare diseases, kind of help them get care they deserve, raise funds for kids with rare diseases. And this is very, very personal to you. This isn't something that you just came up with out of the blue. This is something you came up with because your family has been going through some very tough stuff. So for those of you that for those out there watching this that don't know you, don't know the whole story, how about just starting from where you think the right place is to start, and kind of
Mm-hmm.
walk us through the story of how we got here?
Sure. So the foundation we started is called the Gilmore Family Foundation. I say this a little jokingly, but the reason we named it after our family is just because, as you'll learn in a second, between our two children, we've had three rare diseases hit them. So we couldn't really call it the bone marrow failure, ATRX,
Right.
cystic fibrosis foundation. So we made it shorter to our family's specific story. But it all started basically in 2018. My daughter Mara, who is now 6, it was we had just closed on our house to move to the suburbs. My wife was pregnant with our second, our son Jay, who's now 4. We were kind of doing the normal thing. We'd lived in the city for a while. We were ready to have our second, so let's move to the suburbs and just kind of get to the next chapter of life. And then July of 2018, Mara was diagnosed with what's called severe aplastic anemia, which is bone marrow failure. Essentially, her bone marrow just quit producing blood cells, and you need blood cells to live. So it's not a survivable disease unless you have a full response to treatment. So that was, it was just an absolute shock and whirlwind. And she was only 2 years old when she was diagnosed, and I knew, my wife and I knew absolutely nothing about, I didn't know frankly, I didn't know what a bone marrow did. I knew we had it, but I didn't, so all of a sudden you're in this situation where it's something you know nothing about, and it's a rare enough disease that there's very few hospitals and doctors in the country who have the expertise to be able to actually treat it, so, we went through a phase where we were just trying to figure out, okay, what the heck is this? And then it was, okay, now how do we figure out where and how to treat it? We ultimately ended up at the Children's Hospital, or Children's Wisconsin in Milwaukee, it's what's called the Mac Fund Center within Children's Wisconsin, where they specialize in treating severe aplastic anemia. We got kind of lucky because Milwaukee from Arlington Heights is only an hour and 20 minutes away or so, and they're one of like 3 or 4 places in the country that actually treat this specific disease. So once we made it up to Milwaukee, my daughter underwent it was called intense immune suppression therapy. It was either that or a bone marrow transplant. Those were the 2 treatment options. There's a whole bunch of different. We could do a 3-hour podcast on that. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into what's best for each kid. Some kids, only one is possible. Only one is available. For Mara, both were actually available, but neither was obvious. So it was literally just kind of a decision-making process we had to go through with her doctor, which, at that point in my life was like by far the hardest decision my wife or I had to make. So she did the intense immune suppression therapy, which essentially was like, it's as if you like unplugged your immune system and plugged it back in. That's kind of the layman terms for it. But it consisted of, she was in the hospital for inpatient treatment for a couple weeks. And then it was a year's worth of treatment at home / hospital after that. I mean, they had to keep her immune system suppressed, which required, chemo drugs akin to chemo drugs for this disease for almost a year. I mean, she was hooked up to an IV for 12 to 24 hours a day for almost a year, and she's only 2 years old. So it was a extremely hard process. And what complicated it was that, I mentioned my wife was pregnant when we got the diagnosis. So Lauren was pregnant when we got the diagnosis. Jay, my son, was born December 31st of the year that my daughter was going through treatment. So we were about midway through treatment. And Jay was born, and like immediately Jay started having issues himself. And it was the next 5, 6, 7 months were just bonkers, because we were doing everything we could to get Mara healthy. Mind you, we're making 2 to 3 days a week. We're up in Milwaukee. Plus, she's hooked up to an IV machine 12 to 24 hours a day. And then my son is like, he won't eat, he won't sleep. Like, there's clearly something is wrong. We're not sure what it was. Doctors kind of thought we were nuts for thinking there was something wrong. They just kind of thought, well, you've got one sick kid, so you're just worried that your second kid is sick also. And then, long story short, Mara goes into remission in August of 2019, I guess it would have been, which was a great moment. You're extremely happy. It's been just a brutal year. But then 2 weeks later, Jay is diagnosed with what's called ATRX syndrome. ATRX syndrome is an X-linked genetic syndrome that ATRX is like a regulator gene. So it affects every one of your bodily systems, and it causes pretty severe both physical and mental disabilities. It's extremely rare. At the time he was diagnosed, there was only 200 known cases of it ever in the history of the world. And what Mara had, bone marrow failure, her age was like 1 in 2 million or something like that. So it was just like the biggest mind bender you could possibly imagine. Just really hard to wrap our heads around. And so it was a really weird moment where you're just trying to figure out, like, you're extremely excited Mara's now healthy, but then you got this thing with Jay going on. And then to make it even more complicated, we finally got it to where we had the first 2 years of any kid who has ATRX syndrome, it's a whirlwind, because it's really hard to get them to eat. So a lot of the kids are on feeding tubes. They have horrendous gastro problems. And they're pretty sickly. Their immune systems are pretty weak. So a lot of them end up in and out of the hospital quite a bit. And we actually, his first 2 years, other than the feeding part, he was doing great. But then when he was, I guess it was right before he turned 3, he started having horrible problems with his pancreas. Blood sugar kept dipping, so he was in the hospital for that. We didn't know what. And then all of a sudden he started getting pancreatitis. So he had pancreatitis at the age of 3, like 3 or 4 times, where he had to be hospitalized. One time he was in the ICU for 2 weeks because it knocked him out so badly. And at that point, we started to suspect that it was something beyond his syndrome that was causing his pancreas problems. And after we just dug, ultimately he was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis as well. So when you add up the whole story, it was, my daughter had bone marrow failure, and then my son Jay then had what's called ATRX syndrome. Then about a year and a half later is diagnosed also with cystic fibrosis. And so we've kind of had the full gamut of rare disease thrown at us. From our daughters, it was a life-threatening disease that we had to spend basically a year sprinting to get her better. Then ATRX is a lifelong threat. Fibrosis, if not managed properly, can be life-threatening. But with the advances they've had with cystic fibrosis over the years, it actually is fairly manageable. And believe it or not, ever since Jay was diagnosed, he's actually been doing a lot better, because we're actually treating it now. So there's enzymes, for example, he takes before he eats every one of his meals, and all of a sudden his digestive system works how it's supposed to. So
So is Mara who's 6? Is she generally doing really well right now?
yeah, knocking on all the wood
Yeah.
around me. But she was basically in the short answer is yes. So she's been in remission for 3.5 years. Once she went into remission, they told us there's about a 5-year tail post treatment where there's a 20 to 40% chance of relapse. So that's, it's higher than you'd want it to be. But usually if you're going to relapse, it's within the first year. And so
Right.
we're 3.5 years out. Her numbers, the numbers we're looking for are, you test to see what her white blood cell count is, her platelets are, and what her red blood cell count is. And they've been rock solid stable ever since she went into remission. And so she's, as far as we know, and as far as her doctors know, she is a completely healthy little girl. And that's how we treat it, essentially, other than she gets more regular checkups
Right.
than most kids do. And when she gets sick, like if she was going to relapse, it would be most likely be because she got like a virus. And then your bone marrow
Right.
produces extra white blood cells. And then as it kind of resets, it just tanks. That would be most likely how a relapse would happen. So every time she gets sick, we're a little extra nervous, but particularly the first time she did. But
Well,
she's
I'm
now
also
at this point. Go ahead.
also thinking that you've been going through this with Mara during the pandemic, right? Where there's a virus floating around the entire
Well,
world. So like what impact has COVID had with all of this? I mean, obviously that has
yeah,
to have complicated everything too.
it did. Well, she went into remission like 2 or 3 months before COVID hit. So we had like I joke about it, but like we basically been doing social distancing like before it
Right.
became cool, because we
Right.
like when she was going through treatment for that year, she was completely isolated in her house, other than when she was in the hospital. And my wife did the same thing. My wife's an accountant by it's her profession, but she quit working when Mara got sick, and so I went to work, I came home, I went to the hospital. That was it. So like we were kind of doing social distancing since then. And then when she first went into remission, it was okay, go live your life. Like they don't really know why some kids relapse and some kids don't. So the only thing they could tell us was go live. And either she's healthy or she's not. And if she's not, then we have to treat her if she relapses. And if she does relapse, then it would be a bone marrow transplant is what we would do. But then when COVID hit, they called and they're like, look, we just have, we have no data on COVID. We have no idea
Right.
how it's going to affect a little girl who A, had bone marrow failure, and B, then had the treatment that she had. So you got to, everyone was being careful, but you got to be extra careful until we know, just because particularly at the beginning of it, they just did not want Mara to get COVID. So
Right.
we just packed it in essentially. So I worked 24/7 from home. My wife was home. My mother-in-law came to our house. Other than that, that was it. But we still had to, she was still pretty early in going into remission. So we still had to be up in Wisconsin doing post-treatment checkups fairly frequently. So
Right.
that was wild being in a hospital setting after COVID. It felt like you're walking in Chernobyl when you're walking
Yeah.
in a hospital
Can't
because of
imagine.
all of the PPD and all that stuff that the doctors had to have on.
And then
But
your son Jay, who's 4 now.
mhm.
So his day-to-day status, like how is Jay doing?
So Jay is doing unbelievably well, all things considered. So like when he was first diagnosed, they told us we don't know if he'll ever walk or if he'll ever talk. Like it was one of those things where like when we got the diagnosis, the doctor was like, "Don't Google it." You know what I mean? Like and
Right.
if you do Google it, it looks not great. And so which we obviously did Google it, but it's because what we're finding is because it's so rare, like only the most extreme cases were known before, and so Jay is very clearly mentally and physically disabled, but like he's 4 years old and he's almost running. Like they weren't sure if he'd ever be able to communicate with us. Jay, if I am talking to Jay 100% understands what I'm saying. Jay has a little speaking device that he uses where he can communicate with us. Like if he wants to watch a specific TV show, he can, I want to watch Bluey, or I want to watch Super Simple Songs, or if he wants food, he can tell me. If he's all done, he can tell me. And then he knows a little bit of sign language. So what he's able to do versus, what was, it wasn't like anyone was putting a ceiling on him, but kind of what people led us to, the way people set their expectations towards us, he's light years above that. And what
Right.
my wife and I have found is just, I have no idea where Jay's ceiling is going to be, and we are certainly not going to be the ones that
Right.
put the ceiling on him. But he does great. He's an extremely happy little guy. So he's doing awesome, despite the hand that was dealt to him.
So what I really I'm always amazed at is people who go through such a difficult thing or are going through it and then also decide to try to help people because of that. And this in a very different way, this reminds me that, like with Justin Hardy and the Hardy
Mhm.
Strong Foundation, and the fact that, think of Justin Hardy's parents who lose their son at age 21, and then to make something great out of that, they've started the Hardy Strong Foundation. To tell me how you got to from the point, Andrew, of going through all this, which I can't imagine what this is, the toll this has taken, but then the decision to start the Gilmore Family Foundation to try to help kids with diseases like Mara and Jay have
Mhm.
had. So why the foundation? How did that come to be?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of it is just, you know, going through something like this, it wears everything down to like what is the absolute most important things in life, and it makes you reprioritize, and it makes you you just look at life a whole lot differently. And in addition to that, my wife and I, we look at time a lot more differently than we did before. And so some of it is just, we went through this. My wife and I realized through this that, we're a pretty good team. We really enjoy, like, we were forced to just work together constantly in
Yeah.
order to get our kids healthy. And then when you're coming out of it, like all we've done our last 4 years, like I maintained a career, but it was like do what I could to maintain, and it was always second fiddle. And then you're coming out of it, and you're like, okay, so now how do we spend our time? And then it's like I was kind of thinking like, do I really want to go back into being a full-time private lawyer in a law firm doing mergers and acquisitions transactions? And my wife was thinking, do I really want to go be a bean counter? Do I really want to go into accounting? And it's like, so some of it's like, how are we going to spend our time now? And then other part of it is, geez, we just experienced something that hardly anybody else has. And it's like, you see how when you work really hard together, and you see like when kids and families backs are against the wall, how well they can respond. But then you also see, there's a lot of holes in our medical system. There's a lot of holes in the research system that could very easily be filled. And you start to think like there's, not that many people have experienced those things the way that we have. Even doctors who are living in it all the time, like their families haven't necessarily gone through it. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so
Right.
it was kind of we've been through this. We see what's lacking. We also see, but then what's interesting about our situation is because we've had 3 different rare diseases, since we've been to 3 different hospitals, and it's all 3 different kinds of diseases. We've also seen what really works. And so, like where our daughter was treated at the Mac Fund Center in Wisconsin, it was like no kid should ever get sick. But like if you're gonna get sick, like that is how you should be treated. I mean,
Right.
they were just, there's not enough good words on planet Earth that I could ever use to describe the people at the Mac Fund Center that treat kids with rare blood diseases and cancers. And so some of it was just like we were just so grateful at how well that Mara had been treated that we wanted to fundraise for the Mac Fund Center just to be sure that every other kid got the same treatment that Mara did. But then on Jay's side, his disease was even more rare than Mara's, and there's like no research going on. Well, there's
Right.
very little research going on with ATRX, but there could be, you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
and then with the way we've had to fight, I didn't go into it too much, but like we've had to just fight tooth and nail all the time to make sure that Jay gets the care that he needs. And a lot of that's because doctors just don't know ATRX, you know what I mean? So it's not really their fault, but we're just constantly having to educate people on even what it is and how it affects him. And then when he needs multiple different doctors to help him, it's really burdensome to be able
Yeah.
to get him the care that he deserves. And so when we're kind of connecting all the different dots, it's like I think we can help push this forward, and other kids who are dealing with rare diseases, we can help them. Plus then it's a way for us to stay close to the rare disease community, and kind of put all that together, and here we are.
It's amazing. And shout out to Lauren, also an Illinois Wesleyan grad, class of
Mm-hmm.
2008.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have been through a lot, but you're doing wonderful things out of this. If you had to describe the mission of the
Mm-hmm.
Gilmore Family Foundation in a sentence or two, just to make it super clear for everyone, what's the mission of the foundation?
Raising money to support rare disease treatment and research. That on the treatment side, it's like I said, it was born out of the way my daughter was treated at the Mac Fund. Like that is how every single kid who has any disease, in particular a rare disease, should be treated. And it's the reality is it's lacking a lot of times. And so what my daughter got for a specific blood disorder or a blood cancer, we're trying to essentially replicate for kids who have rare diseases generally. So we're funding clinics within hospitals that are focused on rare disease. First of all, diagnosis, because a lot of kids have rare diseases, and people but they can't find the diagnosis. Right. They know something wrong, they can't find it. A lot of kids are diagnosed with one rare disease, but they also have another. That was my son's issue, was that he had two, and they were only treating one. And if you have one clinic that's just kind of the base, the hub, where the patient's at the middle, and then you've got kind of a whole team around that kid, all of a sudden it makes his diagnosis and then care that much better. And that, we are very convinced that the reason kids like my daughter have the success rates that they do with the treatment they get is because of the clinic they've built around that. Sure. And that literally saves lives. And so we basically want to replicate that on the rare disease side. So that's the kind of the treatment side of it.
Very clear.
And and it's just we've seen what works perfectly, and we're basically just trying to replicate that. And so the first thing we're funding is what's called the Undiagnosed and Rare Disease Program at Children's Wisconsin. So it just worked out perfectly that they were looking to fundraise for this new Undiagnosed and Rare Disease Program at Children's Wisconsin, where my daughter was treated, and they're replicating the Mac Fund Center where my daughter was treated in order to create the Undiagnosed and Rare Disease Program. So it just kind of, when we reached out to them, because initially we wanted to raise money for the Mac Fund Center, and they're like, actually, given your family's story and what you guys know, Undiagnosed and Rare Disease Program probably makes a lot more sense. And then we started talking to them, and the rest is history. And then on the research side, the Undiagnosed and Rare Disease Program is also, they also have a research arm into rare diseases. And then in the future, that's kind of, it's kind of a TBD where we go on the research side. There's all sorts of interesting research out there in rare disease world, whether it's on genetics or on drug repurposing or drug discovery type companies or initiatives. And so eventually we'll get into that. But for our first fundraiser, we are funding this Undiagnosed and Rare Disease Program. They have the clinical arm that can provide kind of, their doctors call it wraparound care, where they basically just latch into a kid who has a rare disease, you get them the diagnosis, you get them the care that he or she needs. And that, we've just witnessed firsthand what comes of that. And so extremely excited to fund it.
I want to give everyone a website link, and then we're going to talk about, as we start to close, an event that you're holding. And I want to ask how people can contribute. So the website is thegilmorefamilyfoundation.org. Gilmore is O-R-E. So the Gilmore, one L. I'll just spell it out. Gilmore. The Gilmorefamilyfoundation.org is the website. It's a really well done website. It's got the story, the mission. It's got a donate link. I want to ask you this event that you're doing on April 28th in Chicago. That sounds like it's going to be really, really first class and fun. Talk about what the event is, and talk about how we can attend the event if we want to.
Absolutely. So it's going to be a blast. It's at the Galleria Marchetti in Chicago, April 28th from 7 to 11. The Galleria Marchetti is actually where my wife and I got married. So it's kind of like a full circle thing coming back to it. But it's meant to be, we're calling it a night out to care for kids with rare diseases. And we want everyone to come. We want it to be fun. It's open bar. We're going to have a DJ. It's going to be we want people to come and have fun. One of the things that we've as we've started to dabble in the philanthropy world is sometimes, there can be a little doom and gloom in order to raise money. And that's not how we got through what we've gotten through. We kind of tell people we try to operate right where reality and optimism meet. Like you have to face exactly what's in front of you, but then you've got to find the good and you've got to keep pushing forward. And so that's kind of the theme is we want people to come, have fun, join us. There'll be a short program. I'll do kind of welcome remarks. One of my best friends who I played basketball with, Brian Nussbaum, is the MC of the event.
Oh boy.
Coach
Big
Rose.
Nuss.
Exactly. Coach Rose is bringing a few players up to help with like working the event. There's going to be dozens of Wesleyan alums that are there, along with, dozens of my, colleagues and friends and my wife's colleagues and friends. And it's really just, it's meant to be fun. We want to celebrate what kids with rare diseases can do, but also the idea is, let's raise money to fund things that work so that we can, ease the burden on families that are going through this. It's been pretty incredible so far. We've only been selling tickets for 3 weeks, and on our ticketing site, I think we're at $48,000 worth of tickets we've sold already.
Great.
Some of that is, you can also donate on there. So some of those are just private donations as well. But we set a goal to raise 50,000 on that site by April 15th. And it's March 11th or 12th, whatever it is today. And, we're going to hit that goal within the next week. So that has been just awesome and just humbling and also extremely exciting. And we're grateful that people seem to be latching on to it. And it's just going to be fun. And we've also taken in a lot of money in just private donations and sponsorships as well. So people are really flocking to it, which has been a lot of cool.
So
really cool.
To make it clear for everyone. So people in the Chicago area or that can travel to Chicago on April 28th, you can buy tickets to this event, which will obviously support the cause. And it sounds like a blast. I mean, if I could go somewhere where Brian Nussbaum's going to be, this kid Hooper from Homewood, Flossmoor.
Yep.
6'6" guy. I'm going to call him a stretch four, maybe. Is that what would you call him? Was he like one of the original stretch fours, would you say?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably.
Good old Brian Nussbaum. And Coach Rose is going to be there, some current Titan Hoopers, some non-Titan folks. So the event is there. What about folks that are watching the QCast, Andrew, and they say, this is really cool, I'm passionate about this, I can't go to that event, but I really want to support the Gilmore Family Foundation? I'm seeing on the website, top right, big blue donate. Is that how those people then jump into the mix?
100%. Yeah, there's really one of three ways. And that's one of three ways. There's a big donate button on the website. And then also on the same website on the other side, there's a buy tickets link, and that's to the actual event. And then when you actually buy tickets, you can either buy tickets or there's another donate button. Money goes to the same place. It's all to fund the undiagnosed and rare disease program, initially at Children's Wisconsin. And then the third way is through private sponsorship for the event. So if if it was either your company or if you've got another family foundation or a family office or just family, whatever, we've had, I think we're almost at 20 different groups have sponsored the event as well. And there's different levels that we take, but really, you can also do what we call a fund the mission sponsor, where you can just decide however much you want to give. And then we'll then market whatever your company is or whatever at the event as well. So those are the three ways.
That's amazing. Yeah, and the website is really clear. So again, for people watching, the GilmoreFamilyFoundation.org, and buy tickets link and a donate link right at the top, as well as the story. Just in closing, Andrew, and I'm going to let you kind of close this out with any final thoughts you have, anything we didn't get to, or anything you want to say to people that are tuning in here today. Is, I mean, kudos to you and Lauren and your family, because I mean, you've taken something really, really difficult and are doing things with it now to help a whole bunch of people. And I think sometimes in life when things don't go your way, there's different ways people respond to it. And the way you guys have responded to this is pretty amazing. It's great to see that so many of your classmates and your friends and your teammates and your coaches at Illinois Wesleyan are supportive of this. And I know that so many of your friends outside of that IW bubble are part of this too. And so just kudos to you. As we wrap up, I want to I want to turn this over to you. Like, what else would you throw out there before we close out the QCast today, Andrew?
Um, I guess I would just say, I think the biggest reason I think that we've been able to kind of get through how we got through was Lauren and I, my wife and I, realized that you don't really have a choice. It's your kids and your kids' health, and so you work together and you push forward as hard as you possibly can. And what we've kind of learned over the years is that it's very easy when things get really hard to kind of go down a dark path where it's like, oh my
Yeah.
God, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to my family? What's next? Et cetera. And I think that's kind of fair to go down that path, but it does no good.
Right.
There's no pushing forward from there. It's just like, okay, so what? Are you gonna give up? But then on the other side of that is, if you look at it from, oh, my kid got a disease, like the doctor's got it, they're gonna be fine, like everything's gonna be fine. Look at the statistics, it's gonna be good. So it's kind of like a rose-colored glasses view of it. That's also equally bad, because you're gonna get let down. And so I kind of alluded to it earlier, is like, we try to just you look at reality right in the face, you acknowledge it, you talk it through, you figure as much out as you can, you rely on experts as much as you can, and then you make decisions and you move forward, but you move forward positively. I tell people all the time, if there's anything we did right, it was that my daughter does not remember that she was sick right now. Like, she has no
Wow.
memory of it whatsoever, because we kept it as normal as we possibly could. And in her mind, her job is just to be a great big sister to her awesome little brother. And so we want people to, if there's a lesson, the broader one, it's face that reality in the face, but then move forward positively, and just keep going. And so we want, if there's any kind of general theme to what we're doing here, it's that. And we've just found it's just incredible what kids can do. And then what, in our minds, it's with a few tweaks. I mean, when I described how the Undiagnosed and Rare Disease program is going to be structured, like, it's kind of obvious how it should be. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
in our minds, with some pretty obvious fixes, and I think the same same thing is true on the research side, with some pretty obvious fixes, and with Lauren and I focused on it, we really think we can do a lot of good. And so for the event, like, we've got people coming from New York, California, Minnesota, like downstate, like every place I've ever worked and lived, people are coming. Same thing with my wife. So any and all are welcome, particularly this first one. But we've also had, I think we've had well over 100 people, more than that, donate as well. So we are incredibly appreciative for all of the people that have helped our kids along the way, and then we're also incredibly appreciative for anyone who wants to help us push forward to try to help other people as well.
What I'll ask is, everyone that's tuning in, if this is something that you're passionate about, please consider supporting the Gilmore Family Foundation, whether that's through the event, whether that's through just donating. Obviously, a really, really important cause. Andrew, you'll have my wife and I support. Rosemary and I will love to support this. And if we can get up to the event, I'm going to look at the calendar. I would love to make it up there. So if we
Love
can
to
make it
have
up
you.
there, we will. But either way, we will support what you guys are doing, because it's awesome.
Thank you.
Folks, that is Andrew Gilmore. He's an Illinois Wesleyan class of 2009 grad. He's the associate general counsel of the Chicago Bulls. Another podcast I'd like to talk to him about, maybe winning more basketball games, at the United Center. I don't think you control that, but people somewhere in the building doing. I'd like to talk to
We'll
them and
get
get them
there.
on the show. Andrew and his wife Lauren have done amazing things in forming the Gilmore Family Foundation. Andrew, good luck to you, and let's stay in touch, and let's do another version of this to check in on how things are going. Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
bud.
it.
Thank you.